Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about job interview tests. I've had a lot of requests to talk about this, and I know people hate them. People have always stated all these reasons they hate them. I get it, but let me tell you why, in the middle of a sit down, in person job interview, we ask you questions and give you what the whole I'll go over what the whole range of tests are, from just asking you a question that you verbally respond to asking you to stand in front of a whiteboard and sketch out your answer. First of all, why do we do this? Well, people lie. People lie all the time. I have a whole video on it. It's called My Biggest Lesson. Link it in the description. People have lied to me to my face in interviews about languages they know. I had somebody say they knew C++ and they didn't know anything about C++. I've had people say they know STL, the standard template library. They did not know STL. I've had people say they've written pixel shaders. They had never written a pixel shader. The biggest thing I find people lie about, and so again, I don't know if, like I say in that video I linked, I don't know if they're consciously lying or they really believe what they're saying, but people often inflate their role in features of games they made. And I've seen this happen in all kinds of different ways where they claim that their work was integral to getting it done or that they had the idea for it. Just a lot of things. And then they take full responsibility for the feature in the game. So this is why I have to question people about things like that. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but guess what? A lot of people have lied about it and they've ruined the situation. They've ruined interviews to the point where we have to do this. Now, another reason I want to do it is I need to see you in action. I want to ask you a question and see what your behavior is like when you answer. I want to see what your thought process is like, which is why I often tell people to talk through the solution you're doing, which is why we often ask people to go on a whiteboard to write down what they're thinking. I also want to see what your attitude is, because guess what? You are not going to sit in a room locked with requests slid under the door and then you slide code or design back out under the door. By the way, I'm only talking about design and programming tests here because I've never done an art test or a producer test. Because you're never going to be isolated and you probably will be assigned to work on teams within a project. I need to see how you work. A lot of people say, well, that's awful because the things that are asked. Let me give you an example of something I asked that has nothing to do with games, that I just ask you to think about it and give me your answer. And here's an example I've given people before. You're in charge of the design for a music playlist editor. The user can add songs to this playlist at any time, during creation or afterward. What do you think should happen when the player adds a duplicate song to the list? In other words, they go to add a song that's already on the list. Now, I usually stop there and let the person answer, just to see what they think is the right answer. Then I walk through all the different ways I think it could be handled, and I ask the person to comment on doing it that way. So, solution A: do nothing. Silently refuse to add the duplicate, but do nothing. Just boom. There's no duplicate on the list. You don't say anything. B: duplicate the song on the list. Don't say anything. Again, completely silently. Just add an extra copy to the list. Solution C: a pop-up. Hey, there's already a duplicate. That song's already on the list. Do you want to duplicate it? Yes, no. And finally, solution D: a setting. The player is asked at playlist creation, the user is asked, do you want duplicates allowed on this list? Keep in mind, they can change it at any time. But once they've made that decision, that's how it behaves. Whether or not there's a pop-up if you try to do it, you can tell me whether you think that's appropriate too. So that's a good question because I like people to talk me through what they think is right and why they think it's right. It has nothing to do with games. It's nothing to do with the industry. It's basically what I consider to be a critical thinking exercise, one that you don't need any specific background to participate in. So let's go back to tests. Some people have said, well, why can't you send me an at-home test and I do it on my own time? Well, first of all, a lot of people hate those. A lot of people hate those. They view it as unpaid work. You know, you send me something and I may work on it for 2 days. I'm not going to get paid for this. But worse, people just look stuff up online or even get help from friends of theirs that do that professionally. So I'm left with the same problem. When the test is returned, I don't know if it really was them who took it. And yes, that's happened. And so yes, people have ruined at-home testing. By the way, if you have a better idea of how to do in-person interview tests or what to replace it with, by all means, mention it in the comments. But keep in mind, you're going to have to answer, how does this let you know that the person knows how to do something? How do you know that they're not looking it up or getting help from someone else? And how do you know that they will be able to work well in teams? So let me talk about some programmer tests I've done and then some design tests. The design tests are broken up into different areas because design is very vague. The programming tests, I tend to just ask general questions because anything more than that, I would leave to one of my specialist programmers. Like if we're hiring a graphics programmer, I'd have my lead graphics guy ask something like a pixel shader question or a render pipeline question. So here are the questions I tend to ask, general ones. Given an integer, return true if it's even or false if it's odd. Now I know you programmers are going, well, that's easy. Is it? Second one, given two integers, return their average. Again, a lot of programs are going, this is stupid. Is it? Are you sure you're accounting for all the different kind of integers you can get and things that can go bad if you just try to return their average? Third one, given a string that's a number, convert it to a number. Basically, I'm asking you to implement the C function a to I. Or, given a number, return its string equivalent. I'm basically asking you to return the library function I to A. And then there's a fourth one I like to do, and I really like this one because after I ask it, I ask variations. First one, reverse a string. So if I say, give you a string, hi there, HI space THERE, it will return EREHT space IH. And now, once they do that, I ask for 3 variations. Variation A, now do the reversal, but don't use any extra memory. If they did it in the first one, I'll be like, hey, that's awesome, and then skip to B. Now, reverse the words in a string. If I give you the string, how are you, your return, you are how. And then the variant on that would be, now do that, reverse the words in a string, but don't use any extra memory. Now, and they did that in the original one, I'd be like, nice, and I just move on. So I always have at least, after they reverse the string, I always have at least one variation to ask, which is now reverse the words. And that's it. Any other specific questions? Usually you can ask a programmer and judge whether they were actually involved in it. One general question I like to ask is, what is the most difficult piece of code you ever had to implement? And why? And sometimes I get answers about, well, the design was vague. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is just a really tricky thing. Sometimes I get an answer like, well, the only known solutions are NP, and the designer was complaining about how long it took, and he obviously wanted a polynomial solution. And, well, I'm not, a super genius. A lot of times I just pay attention to how they answer. I'm looking at behavior and attitude. So that's programming. Now let me talk about design. Design, I've broken these questions up into a lot of different areas because there's a lot of different things for designer. Some of them I'm not going to go into, like narrative design. I leave that to a lead narrative to ask questions for that. But I am going to talk about several other categories that I am involved in. First of all, just general design questions. The first one I like to ask are, what are your top 3 games of all time? And why are they your top 3? And then for each one, give me its best and worst feature. Tell me what you loved most about it and what you hated most about it. And this is interesting because I'm asking you to give me your most hated feature of your 3 favorite games. If you can't think of one thing that they didn't do right or that you didn't like on all 3, I may have follow-up questions. And then I want you to repeat that for your least favorite game. Just tell me what your least favorite game is and tell me why. And then tell me what it did best and what it did worst. Because I want to see if you can do that. I want to see if you can objectively quantify a game without letting your emotions about whether you liked it get in the way. Because that's going to happen when you actually work on a game yourself. And then I would also ask you to name your 3 favorite game genres. I don't expect RPG to be in the top. Maybe you like action games. Maybe RPG is not even in your top 3, but you want to make them. And you see a lot of ways the work you've done would convert. But the reason I often ask about the 3 favorite game genres isn't that there's a wrong answer. It's how you answer. If you go, oh, I only like action games, so I'm not going to tell you the other 2. If you say things like, I only like obsolete games or games that aren't popular, like adventure games, dating games, or, games with lots of microtransactions. Those are my 3 favorite genres. I mean, that would lead to interesting follow-up questions. And then the last general one I would ask would be, let's say you were going to implement an RPG and you were told not to use classes. Tell me what the advantages and disadvantages are of a class-free system compared to an RPG that uses classes. And again, I'm asking this question to see how designers can critique their own work if they know why they're doing what they're doing. Then I get into some more specific questions. Combat. I say, how would you make a numerical ranking system for your game's weapons? So when an item is observed, it has a ranking of a number of how good it is. So tell me what factors go into that. And then similarly, tell me all the factors that go into determining the hit probability of a particular weapon on a particular target. Tell me what you would take into account and what you want and why. So those I'm going to do 2 or 3 for each of these sub design things. For a level designer, now I do frequently lean on my lead level designer for this, but I do have questions I want to ask them. The first one is, what goes into making a good combat environment? If you've got to design a combat environment, what would you do as a level designer to make that a fun environment to have a combat in? And then name a game that does that. Tell me a game that you think does that well. And then, what do you think, as a level designer, the advantages and disadvantages would be to having a different starting zone for each one of the player character races? So depending on what player race the player character picks, they start in a different starting zone. What are the pros of doing that, and what are the cons? And then finally, I would ask some economy questions, especially if the person was going for, say I'm really good at making crafting, or I'm really good at doing, loot drops and stuff like that. The first question is, how would you approach designing the amount of gold that players receive per hour? And what factors would go in to determining that rate, like the player's level, zone, whatever. I would just like to hear how you would go about determining that rate. And then the second question I ask is, how can you add new high-level items to an existing RPG without making similar existing items obsolete? Now, okay, so that's the end of my questions. Those are the kind of questions I ask. So now let me just tell you what's common about all these. A lot of these questions, they don't necessarily have a right answer. I'm trying to figure out what your thought process is. I'm also trying to think of what you think of to go into these. A lot of these can be answered even if you just play a lot of games, but you've been analytical about your playing. Some people just go, I like a game, but I don't know why. That's nice, but that's not exactly what you're looking for in a game designer. So a lot of these questions exist for me to dive down into your thought process, your biases, the things that make you a designer. I'm not trying to do a right or wrong answer. People can sometimes give an answer that surprises me. I'm like, oh, that's really good. Now, for the games we're making, which I assume you looked up before you arrived at the company, there may be particular answers that are more appropriate. If we say we're looking for a crafting designer for an MMO, and you show up and go, yeah, I don't play MMOs. Okay, I really hope your answers to the questions are good. But I hope by answering the many, many questions I've got about design and programming tests, basically job interview tests, I've explained why we do it, how we do it, and what we're looking for. I know people don't like it. Again, if you have a better idea of how to do it, I'd love to hear it, but it's going to have to help us separate people who are either outright lying or overestimating their own abilities from the people who aren't. And these are the best test questions I've been able to come up with. Maybe you have better ones. Let me know. But anyway, I hope you like this.